There was a time when no one believed in heaven or hell, the Jewish God, or the Christian devil. Instead, many of these older religions, including the religions of ancient Israel, believed that when anyone dies, their soul would descend into the underworld of the dead. And they all seem to have the same idea. Here we see it represented by a modern interpretation of Pluto, also known as Hades, except that the Greeks didn't consider Hades to be an evil overlord. He was just the ruler of the least glamorous realm. It wasn't yet a place of judgment. It didn't matter who you were or how you lived. Everyone went to the same labyrinthine underworld. Then, when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek around 200 BC, the word Hades was changed to the word Sheol, and the land of the dead became the land of the evil dead. But the earliest representation of what would become the modern concept of hell was the Sumerian version of the kingdom of the dead. The ruler of this domain was believed to be Ereshkigal, goddess of darkness, gloom, and death. And she was said to be frightfully evil, but somehow her rule was overthrown by Nergal, god of war and pestilence. Through a strange set of circumstances, Nergal was born in the kingdom of the dead, and eventually raped Ereshkigal, taking her as his wife, because that's how it was done back then. Rape was a prelude to matrimony, and that's the kind of shoddy morality that found its way into the Bible. Eventually, Nergal was depicted as a judge of the dead souls, and so we have the first hints of the torment by the beast in the pit. But none of these characters are the same as Satan, the devil. So where did this character come from? Because whenever I look at these older images, all of them contradictory, I get the impression someone just made this up. I recently posted videos from David Fitzgerald and Richard Carrier, both historians, Bible scholars, and experts on ancient mythology, and they say that Jesus never existed. And last month I testified before the Texas State Board of Education to the effect that Moses evidently never existed either, that he was evidently a embellished composite of 4 older characters. And I'm afraid I have to say much the same thing about the Christian devil. For example, we know that Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, is a New Testament bastardization of Beelzebul, the Lord on high, and ruler of the city of Ugarit around 1500 BC. Scholars acknowledge that this was a deliberate distortion of his name, and we know that happened, and it happened a lot. For example, Christians like to say that Lucifer was a fallen angel, but that story is a mistaken interpretation accidentally adapted from another culture. Isaiah 14 was not talking about Satan. He was criticizing Babylonian astrology, in which the planet Venus, also known as the morning star, played the role of a prominent pagan god named Athtar, or Helel bin Shahar. The name translates as Lucifer. Jesus was also known as Lucifer, the light bringer, and one of the earliest Christian denominations were the Luciferians. But in this case, Lucifer refers to a rebellious prince, the son of Shahar, the dawn, brother of Shalim, the dusk. These are the twin sons of El. And that makes, and El is the original god of Semitic people, typically personified as the sun. And this means that Lucifer is the grandson of God. He also had dozens of uncles, none of whom were named Jesus. Oh, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. The most important part of Christian theology regarding the devil is based on this one passage, and they've got the wrong guy. The problem is that Christians too often read into the Bible things that it does not say, and then they don't read what it does say. It's like they read between the lines and then don't read the lines. For example, nowhere does the Bible say that the serpent in the garden was ever supposed to be anything but a snake. Now, Christians will say that Revelation 12 refers to Satan as that old serpent. But it doesn't say it's that old serpent. not the one from the garden. Jesus referred to the Pharisees as a generation of vipers and the spawn of Satan. Does that mean they were that old serpent too? And if so, why weren't they crawling on their bellies and eating dust according to the Lord's curse? If the serpent in the garden was supposed to be Satan, then the Bible should say that right there in the first book of the Old Testament. But the first hint we get of that isn't until the last book of the New Testament, which was written in another time, in another place, in another language, by people of a completely different belief system. Not Christianity, not even Judaism. The fables in Genesis come to us from Mesopotamian mythos. And the serpent in the garden, and many of the other elements of Genesis 3, first appear in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh is walking through the sacred garden and happens across the dark maid Lilith. And she was living in the forbidden tree with a companion who was the serpent who could not be tamed. And that throws another kink in the mythology. Just as Christians today commonly assume that the serpent was supposed to be Satan, Christians in the Middle Ages often confused the serpent with Lilith. Who was she? She was Adam's first wife, according to Talmudic legend. And one of the stories is that Adam and Lilith were created simultaneously as equals, and she wanted to remain equal, and Adam wanted to dominate her. However, Lilith knew the secret name of God, and this gave her the ability to fly, and thus she escaped the Garden of Eden. And then, rumor has it that she apparently snuck back into the garden, found Adam with the younger woman, and then adopted the guise of a snake. And we think this because in virtually every rendering of that age, the serpent is depicted as a woman. This one is from a 15th century manuscript. Here's a couple more from the same period. Sometimes you only see a woman's head. And these came from all the mainstream sources at that time. Duke de Berry depicted his as a naga, half woman, half snake. Raphael did the same thing. And Hieronymus Bosch made his serpent into a lizard lady. These were religious men, these artists. These were Christians, believing Christians. But this image of the female serpent shows up in churches too, big important ones, like this stone relief on the walls of Notre Dame Cathedral, and even the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. So this naga, this half woman, half snake, does that look like Satan to you? Clearly, the unsupported interpretations of modern Christians is not the same as that of many mainstream Christians back in the day. Now, the modern adaptation of Genesis 3 comes to us from Babylonian priests around 450 BC. Twice it says that the serpent was created as a wild animal, and it says that he was cursed to crawl on his belly all of the days of its life. So it's a mortal animal as well. Not possessed by Satan, but acting on its own accord because it was smarter than the other beasts, and that's why it was cursed. It also can't be the Lord of lies either, because if you remember in that story, the serpent was the only one who told the truth while God lied. And even if we combine all these unrelated fables into a single narrative, the book of Job still follows after Genesis, and Satan is said to be walking there, not crawling on his belly or eating dust. In fact, Satan is a servant of God. They're shown as if they were friends who never had a falling out, which wouldn't even be possible if Satan were previously the serpent. This is also the only time when Satan ever does anything evil, and he does so only under the will of God, because he made a bet with an omniscient being. And God's only excuse for that? The devil made him do it. Other than that, what's the worst thing Satan ever did? He tried to reason with Jesus. Don't try to use reason on these people. They consider it evil. You ever try to reason with a devoutly religious person, one who thinks that God thinks he's really special and who actually hears the voice of God talking to him? This is why we are lumped together with the Satanists. God and Satan didn't have a falling out until the book of Zechariah. And there, Satan is still an agent of God and is not only standing, but standing on the right hand of the angel of God to accuse Joshua, because that's who Satan really is. Ha-Satan, the accuser. Diablos. I think Ha-Satan was the enemy, and Diablos is the accuser. And this idea is based on the Zoroastrian concept of Ahriman the opposer, also known as Angramanyu. And this is actually the patron deity of the Oklahoma Satanists. So, Zoroastrianism is the oldest monotheistic religion. The Persian prophet Zoroaster established this religion by at least the 6th century BC, if not earlier, prior to the development of rabbinic Judaism. Before then, the religions of ancient Israel were previously polytheist. And according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, most scholars, Jewish as well as non-Jewish, are of the opinion that Judaism was strongly influenced by Zoroastrianism, with striking parallels apparently adapted by every Abrahamic faith thereafter, meaning that Christians and Muslims both adopted theology from the prophet of a different God. And one of the ideas to originate with Zarathustra was the notion of posthumous punishment and damnation. Righteous men would ascend to the kingdom of justice and truth under the wise Lord Ahura Mazda, while evil men would descend into the kingdom of the lie, ruled by Ahriman the opposer, also known as Ha-Satan, the Satan. And this description of the underworld was not only the first literature in all of history to reference an eternal judgment after death, but was also said to be populated by evil devas. This is not the way the Bible describes hell. This depiction comes from Dante's Inferno and subsequent works that in movies and such that show the devil ruling over hell. But that's not what Christian theology says. According to Revelations, Jesus is the one crushing the unbelievers in the bloody winepress. But everyone thinks there's a devil punishing sinners in hell as if he's a prison warden working for God. But looking at this image, and every other depiction of hell from Hieronymus Bosch on down, it all strikes me as utterly pointless and stupid. No superior being would ever construct a hell nor maintain it. They wouldn't condone torment as a punishment and would not permit an eternal punishment for any reason. No God worthy of worship would allow anyone to be damned according to whether or not they believed. This is not the criteria of anything that is really real. This is required of liars who want you to believe that it's real because they want to believe it themselves. They can't maintain their own delusion if they allow you to question it, or because they can't exert force if they can't evoke fear.